Late one rainy night, Beauty sat beside her mother's hospital bed, praying for a miracle. The doctors had done everything they could, but there was one thing standing between her mother and survival: money. Without an expensive surgery, her mother wouldn't live much longer. Beauty held her mother's trembling hand, unaware that a life-changing call was on its way to her phone. A call that shows that God answers prayers indeed. A call that makes everything fall into pleasant places. A call that changes everything. Moments later, the doctor called Beauty into the hallway. His words shattered her world. Her mother's condition had become critical, and the surgery had to be performed immediately. The amount required was far beyond anything Beauty could ever afford. She begged for more time, but the doctor could only promise a few more days. Beauty took a deep breath, wiped away her tears, and walked back into her mother's room. She forced a smile, even though her heart was breaking. Her mother looked at her carefully, as if she could see every fear Beauty was trying to hide. What did the doctor say? She asked softly. Beauty sat beside her and held her hand. He said you need surgery, but don't worry, I'll find the money. Her mother shook her head gently. Don't lose yourself trying to save me. Beauty's eyes filled with tears again. Mama, you're all I have. I'll do whatever it takes. Her mother smiled weakly and touched Beauty's face. Then promise me one thing. No matter how hard life becomes, never let poverty change your heart. Beauty nodded. I promise. As she held her mother's hand, she made a vow she would never forget. She would fight for her mother, no matter the cost. The next morning, Beauty searched the entire city for work. Shop after shop turned her away. Restaurants rejected her. Offices refused to hire her. As the sun began to set, hope slowly slipped through her fingers. The next morning, Beauty woke up before sunrise. Although she had barely slept, she refused to let exhaustion defeat her. She looked at the hospital bill one more time, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, "Today has to be different." She spent hours walking from one business to another, asking for work. Some employers said they weren't hiring. Others looked at her worn-out clothes and dismissed her without even listening. With every rejection, the little hope she had left began to fade. Just as she was about to give up, her phone suddenly buzzed. It was a call from a friend. "Beauty, I just heard that one of the richest families in the city is looking for a live-in maid. The salary is much higher than most housekeeping jobs. You should try your luck." Beauty stared at the message for a moment. It felt like a tiny ray of light breaking through a dark sky. Without wasting another second, she borrowed money for transportation and made her way to the address. As the taxi stopped, Beauty slowly stepped out and looked up. Standing before her was a breathtaking mansion unlike anything she had ever seen. Towering gates, perfectly manicured gardens, and luxury cars lined the driveway. She took a deep breath, tightened her grip on her small handbag, and whispered, "Please, God, let this be the door that changes my life." With a nervous heartbeat and hope in her eyes, Beauty walked toward the mansion gates, completely unaware that this single step would change her destiny forever. Dozens of women had come for the same job. Some laughed at Beauty's simple clothes. Others believed she didn't belong there. But while everyone tried to impress the interviewers with expensive words, Beauty spoke honestly from her heart. Beauty sat quietly among dozens of applicants, her hands tightly clasped together. Around her, the other women spoke confidently about their experience, while some whispered and laughed at her simple clothes. "She doesn't even look like she belongs here," one of them murmured. Beauty heard every word but chose to remain silent. She hadn't come to compete with anyone. She had come to fight for her mother's life. One by one, the applicants were called in for their interviews. When it was finally Beauty's turn, she walked into the elegant office with a pounding heart. Mrs. Harrison looked at her for a moment before asking, "Why do you want this job?" Beauty took a deep breath. "Because someone I love is fighting for her life. I'm not asking for pity, ma'am. I just need an opportunity to work honestly and earn enough to save my mother." The room fell silent. For the first time that day, no one spoke. After the interviews ended, all the applicants gathered outside, waiting anxiously for the final decision. Beauty lowered her head and silently prayed. Moments later, Mrs. Harrison stepped forward with an envelope in her hand. "We've made our decision." The entire room held its breath. "Congratulations, Beauty." Beauty looked around in disbelief, certain she had heard the wrong name. "You are the new maid of the Harrison family." Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Thank you. I won't let you down." As the other applicants walked away disappointed, Beauty picked up her small suitcase and followed the house manager through the mansion's grand entrance. She had finally found a job, but she had no idea that behind those magnificent walls, her greatest trials and her greatest blessings were waiting. When the interview ended, Beauty was certain she hadn't done enough. Then Mrs. Evelyn called her name. Out of everyone who had applied, Beauty had been chosen. For the first time in days, she smiled. She had no idea that accepting this job would completely change her future. Beauty was introduced to the Harrison family. Mr. Harrison welcomed her warmly, while Mrs. Harrison reminded her that discipline was everything. A woman in her late 40s, dressed neatly in a black and white maid's uniform, approached her with a warm smile. "Congratulations," she said kindly. "My name is Mrs. Clara. I'm the chief maid here. From today onward, I'll be supervising your duties." Beauty smiled politely. "Thank you, ma'am." Mrs. Clara picked up Beauty's small suitcase. "Come with me. I'll show you where you'll be staying." Beauty followed her through the enormous mansion. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, priceless paintings decorated the walls, and every corner of the house reflected a level of luxury she had only ever seen on television. She tried not to stare, but everything around her left her speechless. After walking down a quiet hallway and descending a staircase, Mrs. Clara stopped in front of a white wooden door. "This will be your room." She opened the door. The room was simple but clean, with a neatly made bed, a wardrobe, a study desk, a private bathroom, and a window overlooking the mansion's beautiful gardens. Beauty slowly stepped inside, taking it all in. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Mrs. Clara smiled. "You'll find that the Harrison family expects hard work and honesty. Do your job well, stay respectful, and you'll have no problems." Beauty nodded gratefully. "I promise I'll give this job my very best." Mrs. Clara handed her a freshly pressed maid's uniform. "Get changed. The family will be expecting to meet you shortly." Beauty held the uniform close to her chest. As the chief maid quietly closed the door behind her, Beauty sat on the edge of the bed and looked around the room. For the first time in days, she allowed herself a small smile. "This is more than a job," she whispered. "It's my mother's chance to live." She took a deep breath, changed into her uniform, and prepared to meet the family whose lives were about to become deeply connected to her own. Then Beauty met Ethan Harrison, the billionaire's son. He greeted her with a kindness she hadn't expected. Watching from a distance was Vanessa, Ethan's wealthy fiancée, whose smile disappeared the moment she noticed Ethan looking at the new maid. One evening, Ethan stopped to ask Beauty about her family. She tried to hide her pain, but eventually confessed that her mother was fighting for her life. As Ethan listened with compassion, another pair of eyes watched from the upstairs balcony. Vanessa had seen enough. In that moment, jealousy quietly turned into something far more dangerous. That evening, Beauty rushed back to the hospital. The smile she had worn all day disappeared the moment she saw her mother's condition. The doctor pulled her aside and delivered heartbreaking news. Her mother's health was getting worse, and every hour they waited made the surgery even riskier. Back at the mansion, Ethan noticed Beauty's swollen eyes. At first, she insisted she was fine, but the weight on her heart became too much to hide. She finally told him about her mother's illness. Ethan listened without interrupting, and for the first time in a long while, Beauty felt that someone truly understood her pain. From the upstairs balcony, Vanessa watched every moment. The concern in Ethan's eyes was something she hadn't seen in a very long time. She realized this was no longer simple kindness. If she didn't act quickly, she might lose the man she had planned to marry. Scene 14. Vanessa confronts Beauty voiceover. Over the next few days, Ethan's kindness toward Beauty became impossible to ignore. He greeted her with a smile every morning, thanked her whenever she served him, and often asked how her mother was doing. To Ethan, it was nothing more than simple kindness. But to Vanessa, it felt like a threat. Every smile Ethan gave Beauty felt like one less smile for her. Every conversation they shared filled Vanessa with jealousy she could no longer control. One quiet afternoon, as Beauty finished watering the flowers in the mansion's garden, Vanessa walked toward her with slow, confident steps. There was a smile on her face, but there was nothing kind about it. Dialogue Vanessa, crossing her arms. "You're settling in quite comfortably, aren't you, Beauty? I'm just grateful for the opportunity to work here, ma'am." Vanessa. "Really?" She takes another step closer. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've become very comfortable around Ethan." Beauty. "I'm sorry? Don't pretend you don't understand. I've noticed the way he talks to you, the way he smiles at you, the way he keeps defending you." Beauty. "Mr. Ethan has only been kind to me." "That's all." Vanessa laughs sarcastically. "Kind? You expect me to believe that? I've known Ethan since we were children. I know exactly how he behaves around women, and lately, he's been paying far too much attention to you." Beauty. "Ma'am, I would never do anything to disrespect you or your relationship." Vanessa, voice turning cold. "Then listen carefully. You are nothing more than a maid. I am the woman he's going to marry. So don't confuse kindness with affection. People like you have a habit of dreaming far beyond their place." Beauty lowered her eyes, trying to remain calm despite the painful words. "Beauty, I came here for one reason, to earn money for my mother's treatment. I have no interest in anyone's relationship." Vanessa leaned in until they were almost face to face. "Vanessa, good. Because if I ever see you getting close to Ethan again, I'll personally make sure you never work in this city again." A brief silence followed. Beauty swallowed hard but refused to cry. Beauty softly but firmly. "I respect you, ma'am, but I won't apologize for someone else's kindness." Vanessa stared at her for a moment, surprised by Beauty's quiet courage. Without another word, she turned and walked away. Hidden behind one of the garden pillars, someone had heard every single word. Ethan. His expression slowly changed from confusion to disappointment to anger. For the first time, he began to see the side of Vanessa she had spent years trying to hide. Just as Vanessa walked away, Ethan stepped out from behind the corner. He had heard enough to understand what was happening. Although Beauty tried to defend Vanessa, Ethan knew the truth. From that day forward, he quietly promised himself that he would never allow anyone to treat Beauty unfairly again. Humiliated by Ethan's growing concern for Beauty, Vanessa came up with a cruel plan. She decided that if Beauty couldn't be driven away by fear, she would be destroyed by shame. All she needed was the perfect opportunity. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Vanessa asked Beauty to return her priceless diamond necklace to her bedroom. Minutes later, the entire mansion echoed with Vanessa's screams. The necklace had disappeared, and every finger immediately pointed at the new maid. As the guards searched Beauty's belongings, the impossible happened. Vanessa's necklace was found inside Beauty's cleaning bag. Beauty stood frozen in disbelief. She knew she was innocent, but the evidence seemed impossible to deny. While everyone else believed Beauty was guilty, Ethan refused to accept it. Something about the situation didn't make sense. Ignoring Vanessa's protests, he ordered the security team to check the mansion's CCTV cameras before anyone made a final decision. The security footage revealed the truth no one expected. Beauty had returned the necklace exactly where Vanessa instructed. Moments later, Vanessa secretly entered the room, took the necklace herself, and hid it inside Beauty's bag. The room fell silent. In a single moment, Beauty's innocence was proven, and Vanessa's carefully planned trap began to display. Although Beauty's name had been cleared, the damage had already been done. She thanked Ethan for believing in her when no one else did. Ethan simply smiled and told her that trust had to be earned, and she had earned his from the very first day they met. The next day, Beauty received another call from the hospital. Her mother's condition had taken a sudden turn for the worse. The doctors warned that the surgery could not be delayed any longer. Beauty felt as though the little hope she had left was slipping away. That night, while Beauty sat beside her mother's hospital bed, praying for a miracle, someone else made a life-changing decision. Unable to bear the thought of watching Beauty lose the only family she had, Ethan quietly drove to the hospital alone. He didn't want praise. He didn't want recognition. He simply wanted to save the woman who had raised the kindest soul he had ever met. Walking into the doctor's office, Ethan calmly asked one question. "How much will it take to save her?" When the doctor mentioned the amount, Ethan didn't hesitate. He reached for his checkbook. "Prepare the operating theater immediately," he said. "Whatever it costs, I'll pay every penny." The doctor looked at him in disbelief. "Should I tell Miss Beauty who paid?" Ethan smiled softly before shaking his head. "No. If she knows it was me, she'll spend the rest of her life trying to repay me. I don't want her gratitude. I just want her mother to live." With that, Ethan quietly signed the payment documents and walked away without waiting for a single thank you. Sometimes, the purest acts of love are the ones no one ever sees. When Beauty arrived at the hospital, she expected more heartbreaking news. Instead, the doctor smiled. The surgery had been approved because an anonymous donor had covered every expense. Overcome with emotion, Beauty thanked God for sending a miracle when she had almost lost hope. For the first time in weeks, Beauty smiled without forcing it. She returned to the mansion with hope in her heart, never realizing that the man she was silently thanking was the very one she worked for every day. A few days later, Beauty returned to the hospital to check on her mother. As she walked past the doctor's office, she overheard a conversation that stopped her in her tracks. The anonymous donor was none other than Ethan Harrison. Beauty confronted Ethan with tears in her eyes. She couldn't understand why he had done so much for someone who was only a maid. Ethan's answer was simple. Some people deserve kindness simply because they have never stopped showing it to others. The day of the surgery finally arrived. Every minute felt like an hour as Beauty waited outside the operating room. She prayed harder than she had ever prayed before. Then, after what seemed like forever, the doctor walked out with a smile. The surgery had been a success. Relieved that her mother was safe, Beauty looked at Ethan with new eyes. She realized that his kindness had never been about pity. It came from a heart that genuinely cared. At that very moment, feelings neither of them had planned for quietly began to grow. But while love was beginning to bloom, jealousy was growing even faster. Vanessa had been watching from a distance. Furious that her first plan had failed, she decided to play a far more dangerous game. This time, she wouldn't act alone. Vanessa knew she couldn't defeat Beauty on her own. She needed someone inside the mansion, someone desperate enough to betray an innocent person for money. Her eyes settled on one of the younger housemaids, a woman struggling to care for her younger siblings. Vanessa offered her an envelope filled with cash, along with a chilling warning: help destroy Beauty or lose everything. The next morning, while Beauty cleaned the upstairs hallway, the frightened maid quietly slipped into Mrs. Harrison's study. Within seconds, she stole a folder containing important property documents and hid them inside Beauty's laundry basket. Every move was carefully planned, and Beauty had no idea she was being used. Only minutes later, panic swept through the mansion. Mrs. Harrison couldn't find the property documents she needed for an important business meeting. Every room was searched, and once again, the missing items were discovered among Beauty's belongings. The room fell silent as shocked faces turned toward the young maid. Beauty tried to defend herself, but this time the accusations cut even deeper. Some of the staff began whispering that perhaps the first incident hadn't been a mistake after all. Beauty could feel trust slipping away, and for the first time since arriving at the mansion, she wondered if she should simply leave. Ethan listened carefully to every accusation before making one simple request. No one would judge Beauty until the security cameras had been checked. Vanessa immediately objected, but Ethan refused to back down. If Beauty was innocent, he intended to prove it once again. The footage revealed everything. The young maid was seen sneaking into Mrs. Harrison's study before secretly placing the missing documents into Beauty's basket. Overcome with guilt, she broke down in tears and confessed that Vanessa had forced her to do it. For the second time, Beauty's innocence had been proven. Richard Harrison began to question why Vanessa seemed connected to every problem involving Beauty. Even Mrs. Harrison, who had doubted Beauty from the beginning, started wondering whether she had judged the young maid too quickly. While the mansion struggled with growing tension, happier news arrived from the hospital. Beauty's mother was recovering faster than expected. For the first time in months, she laughed with her daughter, reminding Beauty that hope always arrives when people refuse to give up. As the days passed, Ethan found himself looking forward to every conversation with Beauty. Her kindness, strength, and humility had quietly captured his heart. Beauty felt the same, but fear held her back. She knew the distance between a billionaire's son and a maid could never be ignored. That evening, Ethan made a decision he could no longer postpone. He was tired of pretending his relationship with Vanessa still had a future. Before speaking to Beauty, he knew he had to end the engagement once and for all, but he had no idea that an even darker secret about Vanessa was about to come to light. That evening, Ethan invited Vanessa to the mansion's private garden. She arrived expecting another romantic dinner, completely unaware that her world was about to fall apart. Ethan had spent the entire day reflecting on everything that had happened. His heart had already made its decision. Without raising his voice, Ethan told Vanessa the truth. He no longer trusted her. Their relationship had become filled with lies, manipulation, and cruelty. As he removed the engagement ring and placed it on the table between them, Vanessa realized he wasn't bluffing. The engagement was over. Vanessa begged Ethan to reconsider, blaming Beauty for everything. But Ethan refused to listen. Love could never survive where trust had already died. Humiliated and furious, Vanessa walked away with only one thought on her mind: revenge. Richard Harrison had quietly hired a private investigator months earlier after noticing unusual behavior from Vanessa. The report finally arrived. As he opened the file, photograph after photograph revealed a truth no one had expected. Vanessa had been secretly meeting another wealthy businessman while planning her wedding to Ethan. The following morning, Richard gathered the entire family in the living room. One by one, the photographs were placed on the table. Silence filled the room. Even Margaret struggled to believe what she was seeing. Vanessa hadn't only betrayed Ethan, she had betrayed the entire Harrison family. Cornered with undeniable evidence, Vanessa made one final attempt to save herself. She claimed the photographs had been manipulated and insisted that everyone was plotting against her. But the private investigator soon arrived with videos, receipts, and witness statements. There was nowhere left to hide. Richard stood up and calmly told Vanessa that she was no longer welcome in the Harrison family. The woman who had once dreamed of becoming the family's daughter-in-law left the mansion carrying nothing but regret. As the gates slowly closed behind her, Vanessa realized she had lost everything through her own choices. Later that afternoon, Margaret asked Beauty to meet her in the garden. With tears in her eyes, she admitted that she had judged Beauty because of her social status instead of her character. Beauty listened quietly before offering a gentle smile. Some wounds heal through forgiveness, not revenge. As peace slowly returned to the mansion, Beauty's mother was finally discharged from the hospital. Walking out of the hospital together, mother and daughter felt as though they had been given a second chance at life. Every tear, every rejection, and every sleepless night had led them to this moment. That evening, Ethan invited Beauty for a quiet walk through the mansion gardens. Beneath the stars, he finally spoke the words he had been carrying in his heart for months. He told Beauty that he admired her strength, respected her kindness, and had fallen deeply in love with the woman she truly was. Beauty stood speechless, her heart racing. Before she could answer, the camera slowly faded to black, leaving one question hanging in the air. Would she say yes? Beauty's heart longed to say yes. Every part of her wanted to believe that someone like Ethan could truly love someone like her. But fear was louder than love. Fear of rejection, fear of society, fear that one day Ethan would wake up and realize he had made a mistake. Taking a step back, she looked into Ethan's eyes with tears slowly filling her own. She whispered that she needed time, not because she didn't love him, but because she loved him enough to fear losing him. The following morning, Beauty visited her mother at home. Her mother noticed the sadness she was trying so hard to hide. As Beauty finally confessed everything, her mother smiled gently. She reminded her daughter that poverty was never a measure of a person's worth. Then she said something Beauty would never forget. If a man sees your value before you become successful, never doubt the sincerity of his love. Beauty lowered her head and silently cried. Days passed. Ethan never pressured Beauty for an answer. He never demanded her attention. Instead, he simply continued showing kindness. He checked on her mother. He respected Beauty's boundaries. He encouraged her dreams. Without realizing it, Ethan was answering every fear Beauty had without speaking a single word. Sometimes, the strongest love isn't spoken. It's demonstrated. One afternoon, Richard Harrison invited Beauty into his study. Beauty entered nervously, expecting another difficult conversation. Instead, Richard handed her an envelope. Inside was a full scholarship to one of the world's best universities. Every expense had already been paid. Beauty stared at the papers in disbelief. Richard smiled. "Your dreams shouldn't end because you were born poor." Beauty could barely speak. That night, Beauty couldn't sleep. For years, her dream had been to study abroad. Now that dream was finally within reach. But accepting it meant leaving behind the people she loved most, including Ethan. She stood by her bedroom window until sunrise, wondering whether life was asking her to choose between her future and her heart. The airport was filled with smiles that hid silent heartbreak. Beauty hugged Mrs. Evelyn, then Margaret, then Richard. Finally, she stood before Ethan. Neither of them could find the right words. Some goodbyes are too painful for conversation. Instead, Ethan handed her a small notebook. Inside was a handwritten message. "Don't come back because of me. Come back because you've become the woman you were always meant to be. I'll still be here." Beauty couldn't hold back her tears. Thousands of miles apart, life became very different. Beauty buried herself in her studies. Ethan buried himself in work. Every week, they exchanged letters. Not messages, not phone calls, letters. Each one carrying hope across an ocean. Each one reminding them that some promises are worth waiting for. 1 year became 2. 2 became 3. Beauty graduated at the top of her class. She became known not only for her intelligence, but for her compassion. Yet despite all her success, every birthday, every Christmas, every achievement, there was one person she still wished was standing beside her. 5 years after leaving, Beauty boarded the flight home. The little notebook Ethan had given her was still inside her handbag. The pages were worn. The corners had faded, but one sentence remained untouched. "I'll still be here." As the plane landed, Beauty closed her eyes. She wondered, would he really still be waiting, or had time changed everything? The airport doors slowly opened. Beauty stepped outside. Her eyes searched through the crowd. Families embraced, friends laughed, children ran into waiting arms. But Ethan was nowhere to be seen. A wave of disappointment swept over her. Had she been too late? Then, a familiar voice softly called her name. "Beauty," she turned around. The screen laughed. Children ran into waiting arms. But Ethan was nowhere to be seen. A wave of disappointment swept over her. Had she been too late? Then, a familiar voice softly called her name. "Beauty," she turned around. Beauty slowly turned toward the familiar voice. Standing just a few steps behind her was Ethan. For a moment, neither of them moved. 5 years had passed. Time had changed many things. Beauty was no longer the shy young maid who had walked into the Harrison mansion with a suitcase and a broken heart. She had become a confident, graceful woman. But one thing had never changed: the way they looked at each other. Ethan smiled. "Welcome home, Beauty." Without saying another word, Beauty ran into his arms. Years of waiting melted away in one embrace. Beauty thought the surprises were over. She was wrong. When they arrived at the Harrison mansion, she found the entire staff waiting outside. Mrs. Evelyn was the first to hug her. Margaret held her hands tightly. With tears in her eyes, she said the words Beauty had never expected to hear. "Welcome home, my daughter." Beauty could no longer hold back her tears. The mansion that had once made her feel like an outsider finally felt like home. A few days later, Richard asked Beauty to accompany him to a piece of land on the edge of the city. She looked around in confusion. There was nothing there except a large covered sign. Richard smiled. "Pull the ribbon." Beauty slowly removed the cloth. Her eyes widened. The sign read, "Grace Hope Medical Center." Beauty covered her mouth. Richard quietly explained. Years earlier, she had dreamed of opening a hospital where no poor family would ever be denied treatment because of money. Richard had never forgotten. Neither had Ethan. Construction had already begun. Beauty broke down in tears. Some dreams take longer to arrive, but they are never forgotten. That evening, Ethan invited Beauty back to the mansion garden, the very same garden where she had once cried after being falsely accused. This time, thousands of tiny lights illuminated the pathways. White roses surrounded a small fountain. Soft music filled the evening air. Ethan reached into his pocket, then slowly knelt on one knee. His voice trembled. "Years ago, you came into my life carrying nothing but hope for your mother. Today, you've become the woman who inspires everyone around you. Beauty, will you spend the rest of your life with me?" Tears streamed down Beauty's face. She smiled through them. "Yes," she laughed softly. 1,000 times, yes. Cheers erupted from behind the garden hedges. Their families had been secretly watching the entire time. Months later, friends and family gathered beneath a beautiful blue sky. Beauty walked down the aisle, not as a maid, but as a woman whose courage had changed countless lives. Her mother proudly walked beside her. Ethan couldn't hide his tears. When Beauty reached the altar, they held each other's hands. The officiant smiled. "Love isn't measured by wealth. It is measured by sacrifice, loyalty, and the courage to stand beside someone when the world stands against them." Moments later, they exchanged vows. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of every hardship they had overcome together. When the officiant finally pronounced them husband and wife, applause echoed through the garden. At that very moment, white doves soared into the sky. Beauty looked toward her mother. Her mother smiled with tears of joy. The impossible had become reality. Several months later, the Grace Hope Medical Center officially opened its doors. Before the ribbon-cutting ceremony could begin, a poor woman rushed through the entrance carrying her sick little daughter. She was crying, "Please, help my child, I don't have any money." For a brief moment, Beauty was transported back to the darkest day of her own life. She walked toward the frightened mother, held her trembling hands, and smiled. "Your daughter will receive treatment. No one here will ever be turned away because they're poor." The woman collapsed into tears. Beauty hugged her tightly. The cycle of pain had finally been broken. As cameras flashed and guests applauded, Beauty quietly stepped outside. She looked up at the sky. In her heart, she thanked God. She thanked her mother for never giving up. She thanked Ethan for believing in her before anyone else did. And she promised herself that every life saved inside that hospital would honor the struggles that had once nearly destroyed them. Sometimes life doesn't change because of money. It changes because one person chooses kindness over cruelty, faith over fear, and love over pride. Beauty entered the Harrison mansion as a poor maid no one believed in. She left as a woman who inspired an entire community. And perhaps the greatest miracle wasn't becoming wealthy. It was discovering that a compassionate heart is the richest treasure anyone can possess. If Beauty had given up after her first rejection, her mother would never have survived. Ethan would never have found true love. Hundreds of families would never have received free medical care. Sometimes, your darkest season is only preparing your heart. Remember that kindness can change a life in ways we never expect. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next emotional story. And tell us in the comments, at what moment did you realize Ethan truly loved Beauty? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, thank you for watching, and God bless you.